The story of the circumcision of Moses is a brief yet enigmatic episode found in Exodus 24-26. It's one of the more mysterious and challenging passages in the Bible, involving Moses, his wife Zipporah, and their son during Moses' journey back to Egypt. To expand this into a detailed and long narrative, I'll weave in historical context, character development, and imaginative elements to create a fuller story. The circumcision of Moses, a journey of faith and obedience. Chapter 1. The call of Moses. Moses had lived in the land of Midian for many years after fleeing Egypt. Once a prince of Egypt, he had been reduced to a humble shepherd, tending the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro. Yet, despite the simplicity of his life, a fire burned within him, a fire that could not be quenched by the passage of time. One day, while Moses was tending the sheep near Mount Horeb, he encountered a sight that would change his life forever. A bush that was engulfed in flames, yet it was not consumed. As Moses approached the burning bush, a voice called out to him from within the flames, "Moses, Moses." It was the voice of God calling him to return to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of slavery. Moses was initially reluctant. He questioned his own abilities, his worthiness, and even the reception he would receive from the Israelites. But God reassured him, promising that he would be with him every step of the way. With great trepidation, Moses accepted the divine mission and prepared to return to the land he had fled so many years ago. Chapter 2. The journey begins. Moses set out from Midian with his wife Zipporah and their two sons, Gershom and Eleazar. The journey back to Egypt was long and arduous, filled with uncertainty and danger. As they traveled, Moses' mind was consumed with thoughts of what lay ahead. He was about to confront the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh, and demand the release of an entire nation of slaves. But there was another, more personal matter that weighed heavily on Moses. He had been chosen by God to lead his people, yet there was a serious issue that had not been resolved. His son Gershom had not been circumcised. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant between God and the descendants of Abraham, a mark of belonging to the chosen people. Every male child was to be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. However, for reasons unknown, Moses had not circumcised Gershom, and this omission carried grave spiritual consequences. Chapter 2. The journey begins. Moses set out from Midian with his wife Zipporah and their two sons, Gershom and Eleazar. The journey back to Egypt was long and arduous, filled with uncertainty and danger. As they traveled, Moses' mind was consumed with thoughts of what lay ahead. He was about to confront the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh, and demand the release of an entire nation of slaves. But there was another, more personal matter that weighed heavily on Moses. He had been chosen by God to lead his people, yet there was a serious issue that had not been resolved. His son Gershom had not been circumcised. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant between God and the descendants of Abraham, a mark of belonging to the chosen people. Every male child was to be circumcised on the 8th day after birth. However, for reasons unknown, Moses had not circumcised Gershom, and this omission carried grave spiritual consequences. The ominous night. As the family traveled, they stopped to rest at a lodging place along the way. The night was still, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Moses, exhausted from the journey, and the weight of his mission fell into a troubled sleep. But in the stillness of the night something dark and foreboding stirred. The air grew thick with tension, and an unseen presence descended upon the camp. Moses awoke suddenly, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if his very life was in danger. Moses realized with chilling clarity that God was angry with him. The Lord had come to confront him, not with words, but with a silent and deadly intent. The reason for this divine wrath was clear. Moses had failed to uphold the covenant by not circumcising his son. The mission God had entrusted to him was at stake, and his very life hung in the balance. Chapter 4. Zipporah's act of courage. Zipporah, sensing the severity of the situation, acted quickly. She was not an Israelite by birth, but a Midianite, and her understanding of the covenant and its rituals was limited. Yet she knew that something had to be done to save her husband. Zipporah took a sharp flint knife and approached her son, Gershom. Her hands trembled as she prepared to perform the circumcision herself. This was an act of faith and desperation, driven by her love for Moses and her desire to protect him from the wrath of God. With a swift and decisive motion, Zipporah circumcised her son. The blood flowed, and with it the weight of the covenant was fulfilled. Zipporah then took the foreskin and touched it to Moses' feet, saying, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." Her words were a mix of anguish and understanding. In that moment, Zipporah had not only saved her husband's life, but had also cemented her own role in the unfolding plan of God. The term bridegroom of blood reflected the gravity of the covenant and the bloodshed required to fulfill it. Chapter 5. The divine encounter ends. As quickly as it had come, the ominous presence lifted from the camp. Moses, who had been on the brink of death, felt the weight of God's wrath lift from him. The silence that followed was heavy with the understanding that something profound had occurred, something that would shape the rest of his journey with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He knew that she had acted out of love and a deep sense of duty, but he also knew that this experience had left a mark on their relationship. The covenant of circumcision, which should have been a joyous occasion, had become a matter of life and death. Zipporah, for her part, was shaken by what had transpired. She had been thrust into a situation that was foreign and terrifying, yet she had risen to the challenge. However, the experience also made her realize the full weight of Moses' mission and the dangers that lay ahead. Chapter 6. The Road to Egypt. The next morning, the family continued their journey toward Egypt. The tension of the previous night lingered in the air, but there was also a renewed sense of purpose. Moses knew that God had spared him for a reason, and that reason was to fulfill the mission that lay ahead. As they traveled, Moses and Zipporah spoke little of the events of that night. There was an unspoken understanding between them that what had happened was part of a larger plan, one that neither of them fully understood but were both bound to follow. Moses was more determined than ever to confront Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with trials and challenges, but he also knew that God was with him. The encounter at the lodging place had shown him the seriousness of his mission and the importance of obedience to God's commands. Chapter 7. The Legacy of the Covenant. The story of Moses and the circumcision of his son became a part of the larger narrative of the Exodus. It was a reminder of the importance of the covenant between God and his people, a covenant that required faith, obedience, and sometimes sacrifice. For Moses, the experience was a turning point in his journey. It deepened his understanding of the gravity of his mission and the need for complete obedience to God's will. It also solidified his relationship with Zipporah, who had shown remarkable courage and faith in a moment of crisis. In the years that followed, as Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness, the memory of that night stayed with them. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of disobedience could have profound consequences, and that the covenant between God and his people was not to be taken lightly. As the Israelites settled in the promised land, the story of Moses and the circumcision became a part of their collective memory, a tale passed down through the generations as a reminder of the importance of faith, obedience, and the enduring covenant with God.